It pays to be smart. Studies show that the most intelligent people hold more positions of power, make more money, get better jobs, live longer, and just seem to have better luck. But scientists are still trying to figure out exactly what constitutes intelligence. Is it your IQ that makes you smart, or is it your creativity? Or could it be your critical thinking abilities? Just what does it mean to be smart? I'm Laura Helmuth, Editor-in-Chief of Scientific American. I want to share with you some ideas on intelligence. In this series, we'll cover a wide range of topics, including how to identify and identifying genius is a dicey venture. Consider, for example, a ranking of the top 10 geniuses found on listverse.com, one of many similar lists you can find online. From first to last place, here are the honorees: Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Leonardo da Vinci, Emanuel Swedenborg, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, John Stuart Mill, Blaise Pascal, Ludwig Wittgenstein, Bobby Fischer, Galileo Galilei, and Madame de Staël. What about Albert Einstein instead of Swedenborg? Some of the more recently deceased might also deserve this appellation. Stephen Hawking comes to mind. Another female genius or two should make the cut, such as Marie Curie or Toni Morrison. And if a chess champion like Fischer is deemed worthy, other geniuses outside the arts and sciences ought to deserve consideration. Napoleon Bonaparte as a military genius, Nelson Mandela as a political genius, or Jeff Bezos as an entrepreneurial genius, to name a few candidates. All these questions and their potential answers can make for some lively party conversations. But what they reveal is how little we understand about the origins of intellectual and creative achievement. Explorations of this age-old question have long sought to tease out the common features of geniuses working in different domains. The existence of unifying threads, including genetic factors, unusually broad interests, even a possible link with psychopathy, suggests that the mind of a genius has a discernible shape and disposition. Ultimately, the goal is to explain how an eminent thinker arrives at his or her world-changing moment, or moments of insight. Although such breakthroughs often seem to appear in a flash, the underlying mechanisms are likely to be much more orderly. According to one theory that Scientific American author Dean Keith Simonton helped to develop, a genius hunts widely for a solution to a problem, exploring dead ends and backtracking repeatedly before arriving at the ideal answer. This line of research is helping us to investigate whether genius can be cultivated, unleashing a wealth of new ideas for the benefit of all. In 1926, Catherine Cox estimated the IQs of 301 eminent individuals. Using biographical data on early intellectual development, she and her collaborators calculated IQ using the formula IQ equals mental age divided by chronological age times 100. Some representative results are shown here. These rankings illustrate the value of using achieved eminence rather than intelligence test scores as a measure of genius. Philosopher George Berkeley, for example, did not leave a greater mark on the world than Newton or Leonardo. Further, 8 of these creative geniuses have IQs below the genius threshold of 140. The first hurdle in the study of genius is to settle on a working definition. The word itself originated in ancient Roman mythology, according to which every male was born with a unique genius that served as a kind of guardian angel, and every female had a Juno. Much later, after the Renaissance, the world became more exclusive in its application, with only a few people showing genius. Philosopher Immanuel Kant believed, for example, that a genius was someone who produced works that were both original and exemplary. The term did not acquire scientific meaning until the late 19th century, when psychologists came to define genius in 2 distinct ways. The first approach was to identify genius with exceptional achievement, as Kant did. These accomplishments elicit admiration and emulation from other experts in that field, and often the world at large. Unquestioned examples of such works include Newton's Principia, Shakespeare's Hamlet, Tolstoy's War and Peace, Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel frescoes, and Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Even though this definition can be extended to encompass extraordinary leadership or prodigious performance, most scientific research concentrates on outstanding creativity within the sciences or the arts, which will also be the focus here. The second definition of genius coincided with the emergence of intelligence tests in the first half of the 20th century. A genius was someone who scored sufficiently high on a standard IQ test, usually landing in the top 1% with a score above 140. These two definitions have little in common. Many people with superlative IQs do not produce original and exemplary accomplishments. One example is Marilyn Vos-Savant, who was once certified by the Guinness Book of World Records as having the highest recorded IQ of any living person. Her weekly Ask Marilyn column for the Parade Sunday newspaper supplement did not inspire a new genre of science or art, and many exceptional achievers do not attain genius-level IQs. Too often, genius is conceived as a discrete category. This person is a genius, but that person is not. Yet, just as people can vary in IQ, they can also differ in the magnitude of their creative achievements, with either a single notable contribution or a lifetime of prolific work. One such one-hit wonder is Gregor Mendel, who attained lasting fame for a single paper that reported his classic experiments in genetics. Had Mendel never taken an interest in breeding peas, his name would be unknown today. Charles Darwin's fame, in contrast, rests on far more than on the origin of species. Nobel laureate Max Born once said that Einstein would be one of the greatest theoretical physicists of all time, even if he had not written a single line on relativity. Hence, Darwin and Einstein exhibited greater genius than did Mendel. Accordingly, much research is devoted to assessing relative degrees of genius, most often gauged by creative productivity. Finding the sources of creativity has occupied the minds of philosophers and scientists for centuries. In 1693, English poet John Dryden wrote, "Genius must be born and never can be taught." 2.5 centuries later, French author Simone de Beauvoir countered, "One is not born a genius, one becomes a genius." The first scientific investigation devoted exclusively to genius concerned this precise issue. In 1869, Francis Galton published Hereditary Genius, in which he argued that genius is innate, based on his observations that geniuses tend to emerge from lineages that included other brilliant individuals. In response to criticisms, Galton later introduced the distinction between nature and nurture, one's lineage or environment. He conducted a survey of famous English scientists to discover some of the environmental variables involved in nurturing brilliance, and he examined factors such as birth order and education. By the second half of the 20th century, psychologists had moved to an extreme nurture position, in which creative genius rested solely on the acquisition of domain expertise. This idea was frequently expressed as the 10-year rule. Nobody can expect to reach the heights of creativity without mastering the necessary knowledge and skill, because only experts can create, or so the thinking went. Indeed, Einstein learned lots of physics before he commenced his creative career. This explanation cannot account for all the details, however. First, geniuses often spend less time acquiring domain expertise than their less creative colleagues do. Studies have linked accelerated acquisition with long, prolific, and high-impact careers. The 10-year rule is an average with tremendous variation around the mean. Also, major breakthroughs often occur in areas where the genius must create the necessary expertise from scratch. Telescope-based astronomy did not exist until Galileo pointed his new instrument toward the night sky. The new tool revealed what had never been seen before or even expected. The moon had mountains, Jupiter had moons, and the sun had spots. Second, geniuses are more likely to exhibit unusually wide interests and hobbies and to display exceptional versatility, often contributing to more than one domain of expertise. This tendency was true in the Renaissance, and it's evident today. According to a 2008 study, Nobel laureates in science are more involved in the arts than are less eminent scientists. Given that geniuses might not sleep any less than the rest of us, these extraneous activities would seem to distract from a dogged focus on a narrow field of interest. Einstein slept even more hours than the norm, but he still took time off to play Bach, Mozart, and Schubert on his violin. At times, these hobbies inspire major insights. Galileo was probably able to identify the lunar mountains because of his training in the visual arts, particularly in the use of chiaroscuro to depict light and shadow. The expertise acquisition theory also undervalues the genetic components of some cognitive abilities and personality traits that correlate with genius. In a 2008 meta-analysis, Dean Keith Simonton found that at least 20% of the variation in creativity could be attributed to heredity. For example, creative achievement is strongly associated with the personality trait of openness to experience, which is a highly heritable characteristic. The broad interests in art and music of many geniuses are clear manifestations of this trait. Many other predictors of achievement also have high heritabilities, such as cognitive and behavioral flexibility, along with a tolerance of ambiguity and change. Nurture still accounts for the lion's share of genius, and mastering a domain remains central. But genetics seems to contribute to the rate at which somebody acquires the necessary skills and knowledge. Some people can improve faster, launch their careers earlier, and be more productive. In addition, genetics may help explain the different trajectories of equally well-trained individuals. Einstein did not know as much physics as many of his contemporary theoretical physicists, but he knew enough. He could honestly say, imagination is more important than knowledge. These are just a few ways genetics might shape the potential for genius. A lot of studies have looked for intelligence genes without a lot of success. In a 2018 study, researchers analyzed DNA samples from 1,238 people recruited from the Duke University Talent Identification Program, an organization dedicated to identifying and fostering the development of academically talented children. The average IQ for the general population is 100. The average for this group was around 170, putting them in the top 0.03%. The researchers found a modest relationship between high IQ and the likelihood of having a few certain genetic variants, but basically, extremely intelligent people shared the same genetic makeup as the general population. As neuroscientist Richard J. Heyer discusses in his 2017 book, The Neuroscience of Intelligence, other intelligence research is combining molecular, genetic analyses, and neuroimaging. In one study, using a sample of 1,583 adolescents, researchers looked for a genetic variant related to how well neurons register new input, and found that it was related to both intelligence test scores and to the thickness of the brain's gray matter. What about other biological factors? Does a bigger brain make you smarter or wiser? Such correlations were difficult to establish in the past, but with structural MRI imaging of brain anatomy, such measurements are now routine. In healthy volunteers, total brain volume weakly correlates with intelligence and accounts for between 9 and 16% of the overall variability in general intelligence. Functional MRI scans, used to look for brain areas that are active during particular mental activities, reveal that the size of the parietal, temporal, and frontal regions of the cortex, along with the thickness of these regions, correlate with intelligence, but again, only modestly so. Thus, on average, a bigger brain is associated with somewhat higher intelligence, but whether a big brain causes high intelligence, or more likely, whether both are caused by other factors, remains unknown. Recent experiments focus on the connections among neurons in different regions of a person's brain, kind of like a neural fingerprint. These neuronal connections do better at predicting what's called fluid intelligence, which is the capacity to solve problems in a novel situation, to find and match patterns, to reason independently of specific domains of knowledge. They explain about 25% of the variance in fluid intelligence from one person to the next. But brain size or neuron number can't explain most of genius. There is no difference in average IQ between men and women, but an adult man's brain is 150 grams heavier than a woman's on average. In the neocortex, the part of the forebrain responsible for perception, memory, language, and reasoning, this disparity translates to 23 billion neurons for men versus 19 billion for women. It is also well established that Neanderthals had a cranial capacity that was 150 to 200 cubic centimeters bigger than that of modern humans. Yet despite their larger brain, Neanderthals became extinct between 35,000 and 40,000 years ago, probably because they were displaced by modern humans. What's the point of having big brains if your small-brained cousins outcompete you? Researchers have long been tantalized by the question of whether genius comes at a price. Greek philosopher Aristotle supposedly said, "Those who have become eminent in philosophy, politics, poetry, and the arts have all had tendencies toward melancholia." This idea received wide currency in the 19th and 20th centuries at the hands of psychiatrists and psychoanalysts. Among the great writers, Virginia Woolf, Anne Sexton, and Sylvia Plath died by suicide. Vincent van Gogh did as well. Newton sometimes suffered from extreme paranoia, and Galileo, possibly an alcoholic, suffered from depression. Nevertheless, many psychologists have argued that such cases are the exceptions, not the rule. Some psychologists find that creative genius is a human strength or virtue. Some studies with varied methodologies suggest that there is an association between genius and mental illness. Very creative writers tend to obtain higher scores on the psychopathology-related parts of the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, a widely used test. A study using another instrument called the Eysenck Personality Questionnaire found that extremely creative artists, and high-impact psychologists for that matter, tend to receive elevated scores on the test's psychoticism scale, meaning that they are, among other things, egocentric, cold, impulsive, aggressive, and tough-minded. Last, highly eminent scientists tend to score higher on sections of the Cattell 16 Personality Factor Questionnaire that signify they are withdrawn, solemn, internally preoccupied, precise, and critical. Psychiatric studies bolster these results. The rate and intensity of symptoms such as depression and alcoholism are higher in very creative people than in the general population. Research also suggests that these divergent thinkers are more likely to come from family lines that are at higher risk for psychopathology. Psychosis, however, can shut down creative genius. This was dramatically illustrated in the 2001 film A Beautiful Mind, the biopic about the late Nobel laureate John Nash and his struggles with schizophrenia. To quote Dryden, "Wits are sure to madness near allied, and thin partitions do their bounds divide." Research conducted by psychologist Shelley Carson of Harvard University and her colleagues sought to identify these thin partitions. Creative achievement is positively associated both with cognitive disinhibition, openness to supposedly extraneous ideas, images, and stimuli, and higher intelligence and greater working memory. These mental capacities can potentially ameliorate the negative effects of cognitive disinhibition and even channel them to more useful ends. This synergy may well constitute the cognitive basis for serendipity. Not everyone would be able to work out the profound implications of such routine events as water overflowing a bathtub or an apple falling down from a tree, but Archimedes and Newton apocryphally did. Archimedes and Newton both worked in scientific fields, raising the possibility that their brands of creativity may have been similar. A more revealing question might be to investigate how their route to original thought compares with that of a superlative writer or musician. A physicist's way of thinking has little, if anything, in common with that of a painter. For example, learning how to solve a differential equation has as much utility for a painter as learning linear perspective has for a physicist, which is zero in most cases. Yet the themes uniting geniuses suggest that a common creative principle may exist. Domain expertise, such as the knowledge of advanced problem-solving strategies, supports thinking that is routine, even algorithmic. It does not inherently lead to the generation of novel, useful, and surprising ideas. Something else must permit a person to go beyond tradition and training to achieve genius. According to a theory proposed in 1960 by psychologist Donald Campbell, creative thought emerges through a process or procedure he termed blind variation and selective retention, or BVSR. In short, a creator must try out ideas that might fail before hitting on a breakthrough. Campbell did not precisely define what counts as a blind variation, nor did he discuss in any detail the psychological underpinnings of this process. Using a mixture of historical analyses, laboratory experiments, computer simulations, mathematical models, and case studies, Dean Keith Simonton developed BVSR into a comprehensive theory of creative genius. The blindness of BVSR merely means that ideas are produced without foresight into their eventual utility. The creator must engage in trial and error or generate and test procedures to determine the worth of an idea. Two common phenomena characterize BVSR thinking: superfluity and backtracking. Superfluity means that the creator generates a variety of ideas, many of which turn out to be useless. And backtracking signifies that the creator must often return to an earlier approach after going off in the wrong direction. Superfluity and backtracking are often found together in the same creative episode. Exploring the wrong track requires a return to options that had been originally cast aside. The reflections of Hermann von Helmholtz, a prolific physicist who made numerous creative breakthroughs, captured this process of discovery. I had to compare myself with an alpine climber who, not knowing the way, ascends slowly and with toil, and is often compelled to retrace his steps because his progress is stopped. Sometimes by reasoning and sometimes by accident, he hits upon traces of a fresh path, which again leads him a little further, and finally, when he has reached the goal, he finds to his annoyance a royal road on which he might have ridden up if he had been clever enough to find the right starting point at the outset. This account of venturing blindly into uncharted territory and retracing steps resonates with evidence from other eminent creators. As Einstein once said, if we knew what we were doing, we wouldn't call it research. Only further research can expand the theory into a comprehensive, predictive model whose claims can be thoroughly tested. Even so, BVSR can help us make sense of certain quirks of creative geniuses, including their personality traits and developmental experiences. Although they devote considerable time to achieving expertise, they also pursue other hobbies. Their openness to new ideas and their breadth of interests infuse them with seemingly irrelevant stimulation that can enrich blind variations. As 19th century German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer said, "Talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see." Exceptional thinkers, it turns out, stand on common ground when they launch their arrows into the unknown.